what philosophy is behind these nefarious players? Well, you find all kinds of different things that link them together, like Skull and Bones at Yale and a thing called the Pilgrim Society, which is both in London and in New York, primarily. I mean, Pilgrim
And
Society.
not a lot of people talk about that one.
No, almost no one talks about it. And it's huge. So I read about them. And then you get to the pinnacle for Operation Gladio, and that's the Fabian Society. I'd never even heard of them.
Really?
So the Fabian Society in London had all of the brainiacs. They go on to create the London School of Economics. They're behind the Rhodes Scholar program. They're behind a lot of really nefarious things, to include Zionism. And you
Really?
find out that, yeah, you find out that they said back in the late 1800s that their goal was a new world order and that we were going to have 3 world wars in order to create the institutions that would eventually lead the world government, and that they were going to break them up into sections. We were going to have a Pan America with the US in charge of it. We were going to have a Pan Europe with Germany in charge of it. And the British Empire was going to be left intact. There was some
Of
argument
course,
at the
yeah.
beginning of whether we were going to have Britain and then let the rest of the things kind of shake out. But they eventually decided that there would be a British Empire still. And Germany would be in charge of Pan Europe, and then there's going to be a Pan Asia, and eventually, which some people argue why Turkey was in NATO, Turkey was going to lead the Pan Arabic area, and notably missing was Africa. And they tell you why, because they were going to be the slave labor for everybody else.
So
You know,
can
I've
I get
I've
a
often wondered.
Can I
I've
quick
read about that, and
clarifying?
I never heard. I'd always wondered why they never talked about Africa, and that makes sense.
So quick
Yeah.
clarifying question about that. So are you referring to the supposed, well, the Albert Pike letter that it's kind of a legend because no one has seen it? Or did you
No.
substantiate this some way okay, how did you, because I
So
believe this, but
So there's a whole bunch of books. Cynthia Chung's book, um, if you it's the Black Empire in which the sun never sets. She basically takes you through this entire timeline. But there's additional books. There's a book, as a matter of fact, I'm reading like my third book on the Fabian Society, and they basically all kind of say the same thing. Um, there's a book called The Third Way, and that was fundamental to me. I believe Joseph Farrell wrote that book. Basically, what he does is he takes the premise that Anthony Sutton creates with the communism being labeled as the far left and Nazism being labeled as the far right, which
Yeah.
is completely ridiculous. They're both
Yeah. Yeah.
dictatorship, and they're all about total government control, as opposed to anarchy, which is really at the other end of that continuum, with a republic just outside of anarchy, a small central government. That's the actual continuum. So Nazism and communism are on the same end of that scale. But
Yeah. As a
but
historian myself, like an amateur historian, reading about that is always frustrated when they say it's a right wing concept. It's
correct.
not. Yeah.
No, it's a false um narrative. It's propaganda. It's a false narrative. But what the third way makes very clear, and Hegel came from this whole Fabian concept as well, and you probably have heard about the Hegelian dialect. So you have this um, continuum that they basically present to you, that there's this way on the left and there's this way on the right, but they use terrorism and fear on both sides in
hmm.
order to push us into the middle and control us. So we're all getting on the cattle car. It's just a matter of which way you're coming from. The people that are in the streets in Minneapolis that everybody likes to label as leftists, they're getting on the same cattle car.
Yeah.
It's the people that are over here on the right, who's supposedly standing up against them while using the same apparatus just over here. And
Yeah.
that's where Operation Gladio becomes very interesting, because they conducted terrorism to get what they label as far right military dictatorships in power, while at the same time you basically have the same magic strings up here creating the far left radical terrorist as well. And it's not lost on anybody that as soon as the Soviet Union, their far left boogeyman, fell in 1991, that we immediately jumped to the radical Islamic terrorist, which supposedly is somehow on the right, in order to keep us in this perpetual state of fear, in order to keep manipulating us.
What's really interesting is I was a commercial truck driver. I would listen. I'm dyslexic, so I listen to a lot of books. They actually have a book written by Michael Crichton called State of Fear, and he goes after the environmental aspect of it, and it's a based off the premise that we have to be in continual state of fear to control. And it's like right now the green is the new red, and all.
Yeah.
So I think it's very interesting, and I thought it was cool you brought up Glenn Beck, because he's a really good author, and part of the reason I started looking into this stuff was because of the Overton Window. He wrote the book, The Overton Window,
I have it.
and then he wrote Eye of Moloch, which blew my mind. And then I read Agenda 21, and I can't remember, but they have the follow-up book. And yeah, Glenn Beck has completely reshaped my view on a lot of the backside of what's going on in the government. And part of the thing I'm trying to find is, I think that the Eye of Moloch, there is a person out there. I'm kind of like trying to figure out, is there really a person that's kind of like pulling the strings like that book was? But that's what kind of started me looking into all this stuff.
So I wouldn't say there's a person. So when I first started basically doing this research, every time I would make a post, I get all of these crazy bots that would come in going, oh, it's all the Jews. Oh, it's all the bankers. Oh, it's all of this. Oh, it's all of that. Oh, it's all the communists. Everything was, oh, it's all CCP. And so we coined a term called the International Syndicate. It is a criminal syndicate that is not made up of one person. It's a body of people. As a matter of fact, that's why they coined the term roundtable. And basically, what you can think of is there is a table, and then there's a ring of subordinate tables. And those tables look like the CFR, the RIIA, which is their counterparts in London, the Committee of 300 committee, those types of things, Club of Rome, all of those are subordinate. The Bilderbergs, those are subordinate tables that everybody sits at. So I by by calling it the International Syndicate, people need to understand that it is not just the bankers. There are people that are in that upper echelon of controllers that come from all walks of life. You have industrialists, you have bankers.
Yeah.
So what I have determined, if I could do just kind of a visual model, is
Yeah. No. Yeah.
if if you go back to the 1600s, the 1700s, we're all very familiar with the East and West Indies, of the British Empire, of the Dutch Empire. So embedded in those companies that basically went around the world and found countries, took over those countries, and colonized them for slave labor. and products of whatever was their specialty. Well, in order to do that, you needed a letter of marque from the country that sanctioned your voyage, usually from the Netherlands or from England in the case that we're going to use. And you needed a paramilitary force in order to subdue the population. You also needed an intelligence capability to scout out the area before you came ashore. So these companies, these East and West Indies companies paid for their own intelligence and their own paramilitary. Well, after World War II, everything changed because for the first time in the history of our country and most other countries, you had a standing military. You
Yes.
also all had a central intelligence corporation.